Renfield is the newest picture from Universal Studios, which is sort of existing within this, I guess I could say, tangentially related world of their Universal Monsters IP. We've seen them try to take a couple of stabs at this in the recent years. A few years ago, Universal tried to kickstart their Dark Universe crossover event that they were planning to do. It started with the Mummy film that started with
Hmm.
Tom Cruise, but unfortunately for them, that movie was well received and it underperformed at the box office. And so that quickly halted any plans that they had of a shared crossover Dark Monsters universe over at their studio. And so they decided to sort of pivot their strategy and do something a little bit different, take those iconic characters, but add in a more modern new twist. And so we saw a few years ago with The Invisible Man that was a
Good movie.
successful outing for them. Really good movie. I think it was actually
Hmm.
the last movie that we saw before the pandemic hit. That felt like the
Hmm.
final movie in theaters, and it turned out to be really successful. And now they're coming with a new interpretation of Dracula with Renfield. And this is meant to serve as sort of a direct sequel to the iconic 1931 Dracula film starring Bela Lugosi, which really, again, sort of kickstarted the whole Universal Monsters era, which really ran for about 3 decades. They were making movie after movie with Dracula and Frankenstein and The Invisible Man. They made like dozens and dozens of those films. And so here now we have sort of a new interpretation. It's also sort of based off of the novel from 1897, Dracula, which really kind of focused on him and his supporting sort of devoted follower in Renfield. And so that's kind of the
Hmm.
premise of what this movie is. And so we got a chance to check out this movie this past weekend in theaters. And with all of that out the way, I will pass it over to you, man. What did you think about this new film, Renfield?
Camp. No, man, it this Renfield is a Dracula movie, not about Dracula. And I love that about it. It's really about his familiar in Renfield. This was funny, gory, action packed. It actually had messages in it. I think everybody who was there understood that the movie was campy too. They understood how silly it was, and it made for a pretty pleasant, I think, viewing experience when it came down to it. Everyone knew kind of when to laugh or why they were laughing and how silly the film was. And the film, more importantly, knew exactly what it was doing too, and knew exactly the kind of camp that it was and what it was trying to be, man. It is I had a ton of fun with this movie. I think this is the definition of like not every film has to be some kind of re- crazy work of art that transcends time. You know what I mean? This is like definition of like movies are fun. And the point of movies is to have fun. And Renfield does that and understands that. It is a good showing by Nicolas Hoult, who has to carry majority of the movie. Same with Aquafina. I'm very happy. She. I, it, I knew at some point that she was going to have to drop the black scent, but I was like, okay, we need you to do this consecutively for a lot of movies. And now I think there's enough movies to be like, okay, she's not doing the black scent anymore. It is officially gone. And I think what's even more interesting is now I think her performances are showing that too, though, that she's not jumping on the blacks of black women to try to boost her boost her I guess her reputation or her acting. But this I think it was a good showing for Aquafina too, and what she had to do. She was funny. Her and Nicholas Hoult actually worked well together on screen. I love the makeup that they put on Nicolas Cage in this movie. I love it. I thought it was great. There were moments where you know it's him, but you have to look sideways like, is that Nicolas Cage? And it's not really till he like starts talking and the way he talks, he's like, dang, that's really Nicolas Cage. I really love those pieces of the movie as well, man. But overall, very fun movie. Don't take it seriously if you're gonna watch it because nobody else technically was taking anything too seriously. I love that they could do that, and I love that they could still have a message. There's like a group circle in this movie and you could call it group therapy or whatever, so you will. Those are my favorite parts of the movie. Whenever group therapy was happening, whenever group was happening, I really love those parts of the movie. Those really, I don't know, they just worked for me. I actually wished we got something else that happens in the movie that made me wish we got a little like one more scene with them. That I think would have elevated kind of what happens throughout the rest of the movie. But other than that, man, I think I got what I expected for the most part out of the movie. It's not perfect by any means, but a fun outing at the movies that happens to have vampires, comedy, and a good amount of action. So yeah.
Certainly, Dracula is one of the most revisited characters in cinematic history. I mean, there's probably hundreds and hundreds interpretations of Dracula in cinema, obviously taking a lot from literature and historical, fiction and novels that were written about the existence of Dracula or what he represents as a character. And so we've seen Dracula come to life time and time again in cinematic interpretations. And so for this to focus on Renfield, who again is like this devoted follower of Dracula, who's meant to find him bodies and find him people to feed to Dracula so that he can sustain his lifestyle, is a really interesting premise, because you have to have two people that have a warring relationship with each other. And what this movie ultimately becomes about is the fact that they are sort of a codependent relationship. They both depend on each other for survival and they need each other, but that's oftentimes not great. It turns into this really toxic situation where Dracula, obviously being the more powerful of the two between him and Renfield, takes advantage of him, and he's verbally abusive, he's physically abusive, he's very intimidating as a character. Obviously Dracula is this nocturnal, overpowered being who could really do anything and kill anybody that he wants to. And so you get to see how Nicolas Hoult as Renfield grapples with that, how he tries to have somewhat of a normal lifestyle and establish real relationships with people while he's also still trying to manage his relationship with Dracula. So I think the premise is super interesting. And again, this is pulling a lot from literature. They've done this before, but to bring it to life on screen in this way for a modern day context is really cool stuff. And then you add in all the fun stuff to it, which makes it just a really entertaining and enjoyable ride. I thought that all of the choreography was really well executed. The blood and the gore was fantastic because it was so over the top that it never felt gratuitous. It just felt like fun in the way that they executed the blood and gore, because there's plenty of blood, but it's done in such a silly way that it just works. You get to see dismemberment, you get to see limbs falling off of people and heads getting chopped off and all sorts of crazy shit. It's just like really, really fun, over the top stuff. And then all of the performances in the movie, everybody here is pretty much committed to what they have to do. And if you don't have actors that are committed to this type of campiness, it won't work. And really, the true testament of that campiness in this movie is Nicolas Cage. He's actually an incredible casting choice for Dracula. He does look a lot like Bela Lugosi when you put all that makeup on him. Like, he actually has a striking resemblance. And then what he does when he just lives and inhabits the iconic frame of Dracula, when he, sort of brings those broad shoulders up and he has that that face that just really exhibits what you think of when you think of Dracula. He's kind of pitch perfect. And I dare say nobody can have as much fun in Nicolas Cage in a role when he knows what it is. Like, nobody can really have as much fun as him. When I think about all the things that he's done, when I think about Nicolas Cage in Kick-Ass, he was having so much fun in that movie. When I think about him in Face Off, he was having a tremendous amount of fun in those movies. Or even Into the Spider-Verse as being, Spider-Man Noir.
True.
Like, he just knows the assignment. He knows what he needs to do in order to just like bring this to life and just have an entertaining good time. And for all of that stuff, man, I think that this is just a pleasant ride and definitely a new creative, sort of interpretation of what you can do with this Universal IP, these iconic monsters that have been a part of their cinematic legacy for over 100 years now. And so I just really, really enjoyed myself and thought it was a lot of fun. I do want to ask one quick follow-up question though. This movie did underperform at the box office, and it also did not have the most glowing reviews in terms of critics and audiences. So it's not doing the greatest at this particular point in time now. That's sort of opposite of what we saw a couple of years ago with The Invisible Man. That movie sort of superseded everybody's expectations and I think kind of delivered a really satisfying experience and a sort of a new take on the Invisible Man IP. What I just want to ask you is, do you think it's a good idea for Universal to keep tapping into these iconic monsters that they have? Like, I don't know if it's really working. They tried to do the Dark Universe stuff, which kind of bombed and failed really before it ever got started. And they kind of tried to shoot their shot, but they got way ahead of themselves, I would say. And so they went back to the drawing board, and now we have these two projects in The Invisible Man and Renfield. But I just don't know if people have interest in this stuff. I don't know if people really say like, oh, I can't wait to see the next Dracula movie, or I can't wait to see the next Creature from the Black Lagoon. Like, I don't know if people really have an interest in that type of IP in this day and age. Do you think that maybe it's time to maybe take a step back and not make these types of films from Universal from that type of standpoint? Or do they still just have to figure out a new context to make it work for modern day audiences?
Because there is so much universe building happening right now. I honestly don't think Universal has given, I think, the proper attention if they really want something like that to happen and to come to fruition, right? Because in a movie like I guess The Invisible Man, there's a story being told, and there's a character there that works for what the movie is, right? But if you want something to live past its means, you have to build that world. To me, you know what I mean? So you have to make the Invisible Man 2 a something possible in that world. Like in order for Dracula Renfield 2, a new Dracula movie to exist, you have to build that world to be like, okay, it's possible for that thing to exist. And within these two movies, as much as I love The Invisible Man, and the fact that I like this movie enough is, but they're so different in tone. So now it's like, well, you definitely can't really activate anything even if there was something to come out of it, because you didn't, to me, you didn't do the work to say, oh yeah, this could go somewhere. So I really don't know. I don't see it, and mainly because I think if you have a vision for something, you make people see that vision. To me, Universal doesn't have a vision, so they're not making us see the vision, and that's what makes it feel empty. That's what makes it feel like maybe we should get away from these. Part of me wants to say don't give up, just because again, I think Invisible Man is a beast. I was like, dang, I really like this, and so part of me wants them to not make a universe per se, but explore some of those other characters and show us what you can do with an individual movie. It doesn't have to be Mummy again, right? It can be, like you said, Creature from the Black Lagoon, or make some kind of crazy, I don't know, other monster movie. Make a new Frankenstein, or something that feels like, oh, maybe there's something here, and not until they do that, well, I feel like I could be completely on board with that, or something like they could do. But right now, with what they're giving us, it doesn't feel like there's something that they could do. So yeah, it's really on them to me.
It's a complicated thing, because I think at the end of the day, these characters will always prevail. Like Dracula has preceded cinematic history, so Dracula will always be around to be up for reinterpretation. Same thing with like Frankenstein and all these other characters. I think in some form or fashion we'll always have them. The idea to have some sort of connected universe, they tried that with the Dark Universe, but they kind of abandoned shit before it ever got off the ground, which is interesting to me, because those original Universal monster movies did end up in crossover events. Like, you did have characters meeting each other. You had Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein and Dracula and the Invisible Man. Like, that stuff happened, that preceded anything that Marvel did, which, growing up, if you grew up with those films, that was kind of cool stuff. They were funny and silly in their own right. They weren't meant to be taken seriously. Sure. So I think you could possibly get back there, but it doesn't seem like they're interested in that concept now, because Renfield and the Invisible Man are very much separated and standalone and don't have any connective tissue towards each other, which that might be the route to go. I'm not necessarily advocating for a shared universe, because again, they kind of tried that and it didn't go anywhere, but maybe something a little bit more concrete would provide a little bit more faith. Or maybe these characters just kind of exist at a certain level. Like, they're never gonna be box office juggernauts per se. Like, they'll do decent business if they're good films. Like, we'll see them do respectable business, but you're not gonna get this epic movie that's gonna make even $600 million at the box office per se. I don't know if those characters have that type of ability to stretch and relate to audiences across the world in order to bring back that type of performance. It might be a very niche thing, which is okay too. Like, if you just want to do more of a niche focus, sort of shared project, universe, whatever it may be, when it comes to fruition, I think that could work too. You just have to understand that that's what you're going after and not try to overshoot yourself. And so we'll have to see if they have any future projects down in the pipeline that'll come out. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the new film Renfield. If you checked out this movie in theaters, hit us up and let us know what you think.